The moon over Ridgerest was a cold, dead eye in the sky. For 8 months it had watched the ground crack open. It watched the crops turn to dust and the river shrivel into a muddy snake. The whole town was a tinderbox of fear and suspicion. And tonight, they'd found their match. They came for Abigail just after midnight. The sound wasn't a knock. It was a splintering crash against her cabin door, a sound like bones breaking. She'd been waiting for it. In a town dying of thirst, whispers travel fast, and all the whispers had her name on them. "Open up, Miss Abigail." The voice belonged to Sheriff Nathan Hayes, a man who just yesterday had tipped his hat to her at the general store. But his voice wasn't friendly now. It was flat, final. When she pulled the door open, a wall of lantern light hit her. Silhouettes stood behind it. 20 of them, maybe more. Faces hard as coffin nails. Eyes filled with a terrible kind of certainty. Even the children were there, peering out from behind their mother's skirts, their eyes wide and hungry for the spectacle. "What's happening?" Abigail asked, but the words were ash in her mouth. She already knew. Rough hands grabbed her arms, not the sheriff's, the hands of her neighbors. They didn't give her time to grab shoes. They dragged her through the center of town, past the dark windows of the stores and the silent, sleeping church. The rocky ground sliced at the soles of her feet, but the pain was a distant thing, a buzzing fly in a room full of thunder. They were taking her to the riverbed, the place where the town's lifeblood had bled away. And waiting there like a crow in a black coat was Judge Wesley Blackwood. The judge was 65, but he stood straighter than any man half his age. His silver hair seemed to pull the moonlight down from the sky. He was the law in Ridgerest. He was the beginning and the end of it. The townsfolk shuffled into a circle, their lanterns creating a flickering, makeshift courtroom under the endless Montana sky. It was a theater of desperation, and Abigail was the star of the show. Judge Blackwood's voice cut through the night. "Abigail Turner, you stand accused of bringing this misfortune upon our town." "That's not true," Abigail's voice was a thin reed in the wind. "I've done nothing," a voice shouted from the crowd. "8 months of drought, and it started the week you arrived." Another voice, a woman's, rose in a wail. "My boy's got the fever. Started the day she gave him a penny at the store." The accusations came faster now, a hailstorm of fear. Cattle dying, wells drying, bad dreams. Anything and everything was her fault. Judge Blackwood raised a single hand, and the crowd fell silent. "The evidence is clear," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "This woman carries a curse. Her presence here is a blight upon the land." "This is madness," Abigail cried, finding a spark of fight. "You can't believe this." "Silence!" Blackwood's command was a whip crack. "We've seen your kind before. Women who carry darkness with them, who sour the milk and blight the corn." He didn't need a jury. The faces in the lantern light were all the jury he needed. Their fear had already condemned her. But not everyone was caught in the frenzy. Just beyond the circle of light, hidden in the deep shadows of the riverbank, a woman watched. Eleanor Jenkins, 65 years old, her face a roadmap of hard lines and secret sorrows. No one saw her. No one ever really saw Eleanor. She pulled a small, worn notebook and a pencil from a hidden pocket in her black dress. Her hand was steady as she began to write, her pencil scratching softly in the night, recording every word, every accusation, recording history as it repeated its ugly self. Sheriff Hayes shuffled his feet in the dust. "What's to be done, Judge?" The judge's eyes, cold and blue as glacier ice, never left Abigail. "Exile," he pronounced. "She leaves Ridgerest tonight. She will walk until she is out of our valley, and she will never return." Abigail lifted her chin, a final act of defiance. "And if I refuse?" A low murmur went through the crowd. Someone in the back held up a thick length of rope. The message was clear. Judge Blackwood's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, a sound more chilling than a shout. "Then we will take more permanent measures." They gave her 5 minutes. Not enough time to pack a life. Just enough to grab a spare dress and a faded photograph of her mother. Then they marched her to the edge of town, to the place where the road dissolved into the vast, waiting darkness of the prairie. Sheriff Hayes gestured with his chin. His hand rested on the butt of his holstered gun. "Walk," he said, "and don't you dare look back." Abigail took a step, then another. The town's lights shrank behind her, swallowed by the immense hungry blackness. From her hiding spot, Eleanor Jenkins watched until Abigail was nothing more than a ghost, a speck dissolving into the night. She closed her notebook, tucked it away. Her face showed no emotion, but as she turned to go, her hand trembled. Back in her small cottage, she lit a single candle. She opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote one final sentence for the night. History repeats itself once more in Ridgerest. The second innocent condemned. She closed the book and placed it in a wooden box with 5 others, just like it, each one filled with her spidery, precise handwriting. Her fingers brushed the cover of the oldest one. On its first page, a single name was written. Sarah. Soon, Eleanor whispered to the silent, watching shadows of the room. Soon. 1 week later, a stagecoach kicked up a cloud of dust that was the only moving thing in Ridgerest. The sun was a hammer in a cloudless sky. Visitors were rare, a sign of life in a town that was slowly dying. So when the coach door creaked open, people stopped and stared. A young woman stepped out. Sophia Harlow, 23 years old with chestnut hair fighting its way out of its pins. She wore a simple blue traveling dress, worn but clean, and a silk scarf was wrapped high and tight around her neck, which was strange in this oppressive heat. But it wasn't the scarf that drew the eye. It was her, the way she stood, the way she moved. Her dress couldn't hide the confident curves of her body, a vitality that seemed almost offensive in this parched, defeated town. She took her single leather valise from the driver, her eyes scanning Main Street. She saw the peeling paint, the dusty windows, the slumped shoulders of the few people out in the heat. This was a town on its last legs. "Can I help you, miss?" the driver asked. "I'm looking for a place to stay," Sophia said, her voice clear and steady. "And work, if there's any to be found," the driver pointed with his whip. "Lodging you might find at Eleanor Jenkins's boarding house." "Work," he shrugged, a gesture that said it all. "Not much of that around here." Sophia started walking, the weight of the valise pulling at her arm. She could feel the eyes on her. The men's gazes were hungry. The women's were sharp with suspicion. She was something new, something different. And in a town like Ridgerest, different was dangerous. Her eyes caught a sign, Palmer's Dress Shop. She hesitated for only a second before pushing the door open. A small bell chimed her arrival. A woman of about 50 looked up from her sewing. Margaret Palmer. Her face was etched with worry, but her hands were deft and sure. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for work," Sophia said, getting straight to the point. "I'm a skilled seamstress. I can mend, alter, create from scratch. Anything you need." Margaret's eyes did a quick, professional sweep, from Sophia's worn-out dress to her determined face. "There's not much call for fashion these days," Margaret said tiredly. "Folks are worried about putting food on the table. Even in hard times, clothes need mending." Margaret considered it. There was a logic to that. "Where are you from?" "Boston. That's a long way to come for mending work." Sophia just nodded, offering no explanation, no story. Margaret let out a long sigh. "I can't promise much. The pay is low and the work is unsteady. Anything would be a blessing." "All right. Start tomorrow. 8 o'clock. Margaret paused. "You'll need a room. Eleanor Jenkins is 3 doors down. Tell her I sent you." As Sophia turned to leave, Margaret's voice stopped her. "Miss, what was your name?" "Sophia. Sophia Harlow." Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping. "A word of advice, Miss Harlow. People in this town are on edge. They're looking for someone to blame for their troubles. Keep your head down. Don't draw attention." But as Sophia stepped back out into the blinding sun, she knew it was already too late for that. Across the street, half hidden in the shadow of the bank, a man was watching her. He was tall, broad-shouldered. The brim of his hat hid most of his face, but she could feel the intensity of his stare. It wasn't the usual look a man gives a woman. It was something else, something colder. Suspicion, and maybe recognition. Before she could get a better look, he turned and was gone, vanishing around the corner. It sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the heat. This town had secrets, and she had a feeling she'd just become one of them. Sophia found the boarding house easily. Rooms, the sign said. The paint was faded, but the porch was swept clean. She knocked. The door opened instantly, as if the woman on the other side had been standing there waiting. Eleanor Jenkins. She was a thin, bird-like woman, but her gray eyes were sharp as a hawk's. They seemed to look right through Sophia's skin, seeing everything she was trying to hide. "Mrs. Jenkins, Margaret Palmer sent me." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "You're the new one." Arrived on the stagecoach. News traveled faster than fire in Ridgerest. "Yes, my name is Sophia Harlow." For a split second, something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. A spark of something. Surprise? Fear? It was gone before Sophia could be sure. "I have one room," Eleanor said, her voice flat. "Second floor, back of the house. $5 a week. Breakfast and supper included." "That will be fine." Eleanor stepped aside. The house was sparse but impeccably clean. As they climbed the stairs, Sophia felt the old woman's eyes on her back, measuring her, assessing her. The room was small, with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking a dusty alley. "Breakfast at 6, supper at 6. Eleanor recited the rules like a tired prayer. "No gentlemen callers after 8. No spirits on the premises." "I understand." But Eleanor didn't leave. She stood in the doorway, her presence filling the small room. "What brings a woman like you to a place like this, Miss Harlow?" "Most people are leaving Ridgerest, not coming to it." "I'm looking for a fresh start," Sophia said, the lie tasting like dust in her mouth. "Aren't we all?" Eleanor replied, but her tone suggested she didn't believe a word of it. "Supper's in an hour. Don't be late." The door clicked shut, leaving Sophia alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing in. Slowly she reached up and untied the silk scarf. Her fingers traced the scar beneath. A pale, raised rope of flesh that circled her entire neck. A gruesome necklace, a story she could never tell. From her valise, she took a small cloth-wrapped bundle. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a silver badge, tarnished with age. A single word was stamped into the metal: detective. She held it for a moment, the cool metal a familiar weight in her hand. Then she wrapped it back up and hid it deep in the drawer, beneath her few spare clothes. Later at supper, she ate Eleanor's bland stew in silence, but she could feel the old woman's eyes on her. It wasn't just suspicion, it was something else. A strange, unnerving knowing. From her window that night, she saw him again. The man from the bank. He was standing in the lamplight outside the sheriff's office, talking to the silver-haired judge, Wesley Blackwood. The younger man, Matthew, she would later learn his name was gesturing wildly, his face a mask of passion and frustration. The judge just shook his head, his expression cold and unmoving. Finally, Matthew turned on his heel and strode away, disappearing into the darkness like a phantom. Sophia let the curtain fall. She had come to Ridgerest looking for answers, but she was beginning to realize this town didn't give up its secrets easily. As she lay in bed, the oppressive heat refusing to break, she heard a sound from downstairs, the soft, rhythmic scratch of a pencil on paper. It was Eleanor, writing in one of her notebooks, recording the town's history. Or maybe she was writing its future. For 3 days, Sophia was a ghost. She worked at the dress shop, she helped Eleanor with chores, she kept her head down and her scarf on. But it didn't matter. Her arrival was a stone thrown into a stagnant pond. The ripples had touched everyone. Women whispered behind their hands when she passed. Men stared openly, their eyes lingering on her curves. She was a disruption, a foreign body, and the town's immune system was starting to kick in. On the third day, the bell on the dress shop door chimed. Margaret Palmer looked up, and a fake, brittle smile snapped onto her face. "Judge Blackwood, what a pleasure." It was him, the silver-haired man from the riverbed, the man from the sheriff's office. Up close, he was even more imposing. Tall, straight-backed, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Mrs. Palmer." He gave a curt nod, but his attention was already on Sophia. "And this must be our town's newest and most vibrant resident. Sophia rose, lowering her eyes in a gesture of deference she didn't feel. Sophia Harlow, sir. Miss Harlow. His voice was smooth, cultured, like whiskey poured over velvet. Welcome to Ridge Rest. His eyes weren't just looking at her. They were undressing her, appraising her. It made her skin crawl. I understand you have some skill with a needle, he continued, a thin smile playing on his lips. I do my best, sir. Excellent. I find myself in need of a new waistcoat. For court days, you understand. He smiled, showing teeth that were a little too white, a little too perfect. Perhaps you could come by my office this afternoon? To take my measurements, say 4 o'clock? Before Sophia could even think of an excuse, Margaret jumped in. I'm afraid Miss Harlow is terribly busy today, Judge. We have several orders to finish. Blackwood's smile never wavered, but his eyes went hard. Nonsense. I'm sure you can spare her for an hour, Mrs. Palmer. He looked back at Sophia. My office is above the courthouse. 4 o'clock. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. He tipped his hat and was gone, leaving the scent of expensive cologne hanging in the air. Margaret let out a breath she'd been holding. Be careful around that man, she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. He's the most powerful man in this valley. And that makes him dangerous, Sophia finished for her. Margaret didn't answer. She just turned back to her sewing, her silence a confirmation. Later, as Sophia was sweeping the boarding house porch, Eleanor appeared at her side, silent as a shadow. I hear the judge requested your services. News travels fast. In a dying town, gossip is the only thing that grows. Eleanor's thin lips pressed into a tight line. Don't go to his office alone. Mrs. Palmer said something similar. With good reason. Eleanor took the broom from her. The judge has appetites. Young women who visit his office often leave looking like they've seen a ghost. Are you saying he... I'm saying a wolf doesn't apologize for being a wolf, child. He just finds another sheep. Eleanor's gray eyes bored into Sophia's. Better yet, don't go at all. I can't refuse him. Then be smarter than he is. Eleanor paused, her gaze uncomfortably sharp. You're not what you seem, are you, Miss Harlow? You watch. You listen. You're here for a reason, and it's not for mending dresses. Sophia's hand instinctively went to her scarf. We all have our reasons, Mrs. Jenkins. Indeed, Eleanor said, handing back the broom. Just remember, in Ridgerist, secrets have a way of coming to the surface, usually when you least want them to. At 4 o'clock, Sophia stood outside the judge's office. The courthouse was the grandest building in town, a monument to a future that never arrived. The judge's office had its own private staircase. She knocked. Enter! His deep voice boomed from within. The office was a shrine to his own power. Heavy oak desk, walls of leather-bound books, a window that looked down on the entire town like the eye of God. Blackwood was at a sidebar, pouring himself a drink. Miss Harlow, punctual. I admire that. He held up the decanter. A drink? No, thank you, sir. I'm here for the measurements. He chuckled, taking a sip. All business. Very well. He shrugged off his heavy coat. As she approached with her tape measure, he began to talk about the future of Ridgerest, about the railroad, about the wealth that would flow back into the valley once the drought broke. A woman with your assets could do very well for herself here, he said, his breath warm on her neck as she measured his shoulders, if she aligns herself with the right people. Sophia stepped back, trying to maintain a professional distance. Your shoulder width is 20 inches. She moved to measure his chest. I've always preferred a woman with substance, he murmured, his eyes roaming freely over her body. She tried to measure his waist, but his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was like steel. Has anyone ever told you how beautiful you are, Miss Harlow? Sir, this is inappropriate. Come now, his voice dropped to a low purr. A woman alone needs a protector in a town like this. I can be that for you. All I ask is for a little gratitude. His other hand came up, reaching for her face. She tried to pull away, but he was stronger than he looked. He used her momentum to pull her closer, backing her toward a door that led to a private inner office. Don't fight me, he whispered, his face inches from hers. No one refuses me. Not in my town. He was pulling her into the inner room now, his hands fumbling at the buttons of her dress. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. It was happening again. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She drove her knee up, hard, right between his legs. He grunted, doubling over. She tried to bolt, but he recovered with shocking speed, his cultured mask gone, replaced by pure rage. "You little bitch!" he hissed. He slammed her back against the wall. His hand went to her throat, his fingers closing around the silk scarf. He squeezed. The silk was slick. It slid under his grip, and it exposed the pale rope-like scar beneath. Blackwood froze. His eyes widened in utter shock. The rage on his face was replaced by something else. Disbelief, and a dawning, chilling recognition. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling. "That mark. It can't be." In that split second of his confusion, she reacted. She raked her nails down his face, leaving 4 deep, bloody furrows in his cheek. He howled in pain, his grip finally breaking. She didn't wait. She shoved him aside and she ran. She burst out of the office, down the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the bottom, she almost crashed into Sheriff Hayes. He took one look at her torn dress and her terrified face. Then he glanced up the stairs where Judge Blackwood now stood, his hand pressed to his bleeding cheek. The sheriff's face hardened. But he didn't stop her. He just stepped aside and let her run. She ran all the way back to the boarding house, her lungs on fire. Eleanor was waiting for her, just inside the door. She took one look at Sophia's face and said, "Come with me." She led her to the kitchen, poured her a cup of tea and spiked it with whiskey. "Drink." Sophia's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the cup. "He saw it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He saw my scar." Eleanor's expression didn't change, and he recognized it. It wasn't a question. Sophia's head snapped up. "How did you—" "I know many things about Judge Wesley Blackwood," Eleanor said, her voice grim. "But the real question is, how did you get that scar? And why are you really here, Miss Harlow?" Before Sophia could answer, a noise started outside. A low murmur at first, then growing louder. Angry voices, the sound of dozens of boots on the dry, dusty street. Eleanor went to the window. Her face went pale. "It's starting again." Sophia looked over her shoulder. A crowd was forming, a mob, and at its center, pointing directly at the boarding house, was Judge Blackwood. His face was a mask of righteous fury, the blood from her scratches stark against his pale skin. He was turning the town against her, just like Eleanor said he always did. "He's seen the mark." Blackwood's voice roared down the street. "She's a witch who cheated the hangman's noose." The crowd surged forward. "Go," Eleanor said, pushing her toward the back door. "Out the alley. Run." "I'm not running," Sophia said, her voice shaking but firm. "Don't be a fool. They will tear you to pieces." But it was too late. The front door of the boarding house crashed open, and Sheriff Hayes stood there, his hand on his gun. "Sophia Harlow," he said, his voice heavy with a regret that didn't matter anymore. "The judge wants a word with you." Eleanor stepped between them, a tiny, fierce wall of black cotton and old bones. "This is my house, Nathan Hayes. You have no right." "Step aside, Eleanor," the sheriff said, his voice tight. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it?" Eleanor's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "It concerns all of us when a man like Blackwood can point a finger and ruin a life. Was it your duty 5 years ago too, Nathan? With Sarah Thornton?" The sheriff flinched as if she'd struck him. "That was different." "Was it?" Blackwood's voice boomed from the street. "Hayes, bring her out." The sheriff turned back to Sophia, his face a miserable portrait of a man trapped by his own cowardice. "Come peacefully, Miss Harlow. It's better that way." Sophia looked at Eleanor, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, but there was no choice. "All right, Sheriff," Sophia said, pulling her scarf tight around her neck. "I'll come." He led her out into the street. The crowd parted for her, their faces a twisted gallery of fear and hatred. This is what it felt like to be a lit match in a town made of dry powder. Blackwood stood before her, his righteous fury barely concealing the triumph in his eyes. "Sophia Harlow," he thundered for the entire town to hear. "Or should I say, the Witch of Boston? A gasp went through the crowd. "I'm no witch," Sophia's voice was clear, cutting through the noise. "I'm just a woman who said no to you." A few nervous titters, quickly silenced. Blackwood's face turned purple. "She bears the mark," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her neck. "The scar left by the hangman's rope. Proof that she has cheated death." "Show us!" someone yelled. "Show us the mark!" The chant started, low at first, then rising to a roar. "Show us! Show us!" Blackwood strode forward, his eyes gleaming. "Take off the scarf, woman!" "No." "Then I will take it for you." He reached for her. She stepped back, her fists clenched. "Touch me again, Judge, and you'll have a matching set of scratches on the other side of your face." The crowd surged, their fear turning to a fever. "This is why the drought continues," Blackwood yelled, stoking the flames. "She brought her curse here, just like Abigail Turner before her, just like all the others." At the edge of the mob, a young woman watched, her hand pressed to her mouth. Rachel Blackwood, the judge's daughter. Her father's blue eyes, but none of his venom. Horror and confusion warred on her face. Someone shouted, "Drive her out!" "No!" another voice yelled. "Exile isn't enough. The curse remains. We need to cleanse it." A big burly farmer pushed his way to the front. "The river! We'll cleanse her in the river." The idea caught like a spark. It was exactly the kind of biblical, terrifying justice they were craving. Hands grabbed her, dozens of them, tearing at her dress, pulling her hair. She fought, but it was like fighting the tide. They lifted her off her feet, carrying her above their heads like a sacrifice. She was being carried by the town, by her neighbors, toward the dry riverbed. And leading the procession, his face glowing with a terrible, holy light, was Judge Wesley Blackwood. He had found his witch, and now he was going to burn her. They dumped her on the cracked earth of the riverbed. The crowd formed a tight circle around her, their faces a blur of rage. "Sophia Harlow," Blackwood intoned, playing the part of a high priest, "you stand accused of witchcraft, of bringing this drought upon our lands." "You're a liar," Sophia spat, getting to her feet. "You're the one causing the drought, not me." A few people looked confused, but Blackwood quickly regained control. "The mark!" someone yelled. "Show us the mark!" Blackwood smiled that cold, dead smile. "The evidence!" He turned to two burly men. "Hold her!" They seized her arms, their grips like iron vices. Blackwood approached, his eyes full of triumph. He reached for her scarf. "Stop!" The voice was thin, but it cut through the noise like a knife. Eleanor Jenkins pushed her way through the mob. "Eleanor, this is not your concern," Blackwood said dismissively. "Isn't it?" Eleanor's voice was suddenly powerful. She held up one of her little notebooks. "History is repeating itself in Ridge Arrest, Wesley, and I have the receipts." "What is that foolishness?" Blackwood demanded. "Bearing witness," Eleanor replied. She opened the book. "October 15th, 1880, she read, her voice ringing out. "Judge Blackwood accuses Sarah Thornton of witchcraft after she refuses his offer to buy her land." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "November 3rd, 1880. Sarah Thornton's house burns to the ground. She is believed to be inside. How convenient for the man who wanted her property." "Silence this senile old woman," Blackwood roared, but people were listening now. "March 8th, 1885, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "Abigail Turner refuses Judge Blackwood's advances. 1 week later, he declares her a witch and has her driven from town." The mood of the crowd was shifting. The righteous anger was curdling into uncertainty. "I've recorded it all, Wesley," Eleanor said, her eyes pinning him in place. "Every accusation, every woman driven out, and you, always you at the center of it." For the first time, Blackwood looked rattled. Then his eyes hardened. "Enough of this. The witch bears the mark." He lunged forward and ripped the scarf from Sophia's throat. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. The scar was there for all to see, a pale, ugly rope around her neck. "See?" Blackwood shouted, pointing. "The mark of a failed hanging. She cheated death. She is unnatural." The crowd's anger, which had been wavering, now flared back to life, fed by the sight of the scar. Someone threw a rock. It struck Sophia in the shoulder, hard. Another grazed her cheek, drawing blood. Stop! It was Rachel Blackwood. She pushed through the front line, standing between Sophia and the mob. This is wrong. Rachel, go home now, her father ordered. No! Her voice trembled, but she stood her ground. This isn't justice. It's a lynching. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. He grabbed his daughter's arm and shoved her roughly aside. Sheriff, take my daughter home. She's hysterical. Hayes, his face miserable, hesitated for a second before leading the protesting Rachel away. The last line of defense was gone. The mob closed in. They dragged her to the last trickle of muddy water in the center of the riverbed and forced her to her knees. Cleanse the witch, Blackwood commanded, his voice ecstatic. They threw muddy water on her. More rocks flew. She curled into a ball, trying to protect her head. And through the chaos, no one heard it at first. The sound of approaching hoofbeats, a steady, powerful rhythm that grew louder and louder until it couldn't be ignored. A massive black stallion appeared on the riverbank, its rider a tall, imposing silhouette against the setting sun. The rider was Matthew Thornton, the man who had watched her from the shadows. The left side of his face was a ruin of scar tissue, a permanent mask of melted flesh from a fire long ago. The crowd went silent. They parted like the Red Sea as he guided his horse down the bank. He stopped beside Sophia. He didn't say a word. He just took off his long duster coat and dropped it down to her. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. And in his gaze, she saw not pity, but a deep, shared understanding. The look of one survivor recognizing another. She wrapped the heavy coat around herself, covering her torn dress, her exposed scar. Only then did Matthew turn his gaze to Judge Blackwood. The two men stared at each other, a silent war raging between them. It was Blackwood who looked away first. This doesn't concern you, Thornton, he said, but his voice was weak. Matthew didn't even bother to reply. He dismounted, helped Sophia to her feet, and lifted her onto his horse. Then he swung up behind her, turning the horse to face the judge one last time. This isn't over, Thornton, Blackwood warned. Then blame me, Matthew replied. And with that, he spurred the horse, carrying Sophia away from the mob, away from the town. The crowd just watched them go, their fury spent, replaced by confusion and the first bitter taste of shame. Eleanor Jenkins snapped her notebook shut. She looked across the riverbed at Judge Blackwood. History repeats itself, she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. But sometimes, the ending changes. Blackwood was left standing alone, the scratches on his face burning like the brand of a devil. They rode until Ridgerist was just a bad memory on the horizon. Sophia held on tight, her body aching, her mind reeling. She was acutely aware of the man behind her, his arms a protective cage around her. He radiated a quiet strength, but also a profound sadness. Are you hurt badly? He finally asked, his voice a low rumble. I'll live, she said. Thank you. He just grunted in reply. Where are we going? My ranch. It's north of town. You'll be safe there. Why? She asked. Why did you help me? He was silent for a long time, the only sound the steady clopping of the horse's hooves. When he finally answered, his voice was so quiet she almost missed it. Because 5 years ago, he said, no one helped my wife. His ranch was nestled in a small valley, a lonely outpost against the vast, unforgiving landscape. A modest house, a sturdy barn, a place built to endure. He helped her down from the horse, his touch surprisingly gentle. Inside, the house was Spartan and clean. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room. He lit a lamp, casting a warm glow on the simple, handmade furniture. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. I'll get water for your cuts. As he moved around the small house, she watched him. He moved with a heavy grace, always keeping the scarred side of his face turned away from her. He came back with a basin of water and a bottle of whiskey. He poured her a cup. Drink. It helps. She took a sip, the fire of it chasing the cold from her bones. She cleaned the cuts on her face, wincing as the water stung. He didn't speak. He just sat in a chair across from her, adding wood to the fire, staring into the flames. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a shared space filled with unspoken pain. After a while, he got up and went to a small desk in the corner. He took out a piece of paper and a pen. He began to write. She watched his large calloused hands move across the page with an unexpected delicacy. When he was finished, he didn't fold the letter. He walked to the fireplace and held it out over the flames. He watched the paper curl, turn black, and crumble into ash. Sophia couldn't help herself. What was that? He turned and looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time. His green eyes were haunted by a grief so deep it felt like a physical presence in the room. "A letter," he said, his voice rough. "To my wife." He went back to his chair. "You can have the bedroom. I'll sleep out here." He didn't ask her about the scar. He didn't ask her why she was in ridge arrest. He didn't ask her anything. He simply offered her a sanctuary, no questions asked. As she lay in his spare clean bed that night, she could hear him in the other room. The scratch of pen on paper, a long silence, and then the soft whisper of a page being given to the fire. The lonely ritual of a man writing letters to a ghost. The next morning, the sky was still a cruel, empty blue. Sophia woke up bruised and sore, her torn dress a painful reminder of the day before. Lying folded outside her door was a simple work shirt and a pair of sturdy trousers. She found Matthew at the stove, his back to her. He turned as she entered. His eyes flickered over her in the borrowed clothes. "They were my wife's," he said, answering the question she hadn't asked. He put a plate of eggs and a cup of coffee on the table. "Eat." They ate in silence. Through the window she could see the ranch. The fields were brown. The creek bed was nearly dry. "What will you do now?" he asked, his back still to her, as he washed the dishes. "I can't go back to ridge arrest," she said. "No," he agreed. "Not safe." He dried his hands and turned to face her. "I have chores to do. You can stay here. Rest. No one will find you." "I want to help," she said. "I'm not made of glass." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed his face. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "Good. We need to check the north pasture. The cattle get stuck in the mud pits where the creek used to be." They rode out together. The land was starkly beautiful. Rolling hills, distant mountains, the skeletal remains of trees clinging to the dry creek bed. "That's Widow's Peak," he said, pointing, "and that's Serpent Creek." He said the name of the creek with a strange bitterness. "You've had this ranch long?" "8 years. Bought it when I married Sarah." He said her name like a prayer and a curse. "Was she from ridge arrest?" His jaw tightened. "No. She came here like you, looking for something." He fell silent, and she didn't push him. In the north pasture, they found a small herd of cattle, thin and listless. While Matthew checked on a weak calf, Sophia walked along the creek bed, and that's when she saw it. Upstream, hidden in a narrow bend, was a dam. It wasn't a natural dam of fallen logs. This one was man-made. Rocks and branches, deliberately piled up to block the flow of water. "Matthew," she called, "you need to see this." He came over, his face darkening as he saw the dam. "This isn't right," he said. "Someone built this," Sophia said, kneeling to get a closer look. "And recently. These branches are still green." Matthew stared at the trickle of water being diverted away from the main creek bed. "This creek," he said slowly, "is supposed to feed into the river, the same river that supplies ridge arrest." Their eyes met. The drought wasn't just a cruel act of nature. It was a deliberate act of man. Someone was strangling the town, starving it of water. But why? They dismantled the dam, and a stronger flow of water was immediately released downstream. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. On the ride back, they saw another rider approaching. Matthew instantly tensed, his hand going to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Get behind me," he ordered. But as the rider got closer, Sophia recognized her. It was Eleanor Jenkins. The old woman reined in her horse, her sharp eyes taking everything in. Sophia in the borrowed clothes. Matthew standing guard. "I see you both survived the night," she said, her tone dry. "What are you doing out here, Eleanor?" Matthew asked, his voice cautious. "I brought you a warning," she said, "and some truth." Back at the ranch house, Eleanor got straight to the point. "Blackwood is telling everyone you're both in league with the devil," she said. "He says you're using dark magic to worsen the drought." "That's insane," Sophia said. "Desperate people believe insane things," Eleanor replied. "But that's not the worst of it. Sheriff Hayes has been asking questions about you, Sophia. Specific questions. What kind of questions? Matthew asked. About Boston. About your scar. Eleanor's eyes fixed on Sophia. And about any connection you might have to Sarah Thornton. The name fell into the room like a stone. Matthew went rigid. I think, Eleanor said, reaching into her bag and pulling out one of her notebooks, it's time we all put our cards on the table. She placed the notebook on the table between them. I've kept these for years, a record of every injustice in this valley, every lie, every woman accused and driven out. Why? Sophia asked. Eleanor's voice was suddenly fierce. Because someone had to, and because Sarah Thornton was my daughter. The confession hit Matthew like a physical blow. His head snapped up, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. That's not possible. Sarah was an orphan. She thought I was dead, Eleanor said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. 20 years ago, when they came for me, calling me a witch, I had to disappear. I faked my own death to give her a chance to live. So you abandoned her? Matthew's voice was raw with betrayal. I saved her, Eleanor shot back. She was sent to an orphanage in Boston. Boston, Sophia repeated, the pieces of the puzzle starting to slam into place in her mind. Yes, Eleanor said, her gaze now boring into Sophia. Or should I say, Miss Thornton. Sarah wrote to me, you see, in secret. She told me all about the little half-sister she had to leave behind. Matthew slowly turned to look at Sophia, his eyes wide with a dawning, impossible understanding. You're Sarah's sister? Sophia reached up and slowly, deliberately, pulled down the collar of her shirt, fully exposing the scar. Yes, she said, I am. And in that moment, she knew that finding her sister's killer was only the beginning. The real secret in Ridge Arrest was far darker and far more twisted than she could have ever imagined. Why didn't you tell me? Matthew's voice was thick with betrayal. The woman he'd saved, the woman he'd given shelter, had been lying to him from the very beginning. I had to know if I could trust you, Sophia said, her own voice shaking. I had to know what really happened to her. I'll tell you what happened to her, he exploded, his grief and rage boiling over. Blackwood happened to her. He wanted our land and she wouldn't sell. So he called her a witch and he turned the whole town against her. His voice broke. I was away selling cattle. When I got back, the house was gone. Just a pile of ashes. They told me she was inside. You never saw her body, Sophia said quietly. There was nothing left to see. Sophia reached for Eleanor's notebook. Then maybe we should read this. They bent over the small, leather-bound book. Eleanor's handwriting was a meticulous record of the town's slow decay. Dates, names, conversations she'd overheard. A pattern began to emerge. Every time someone refused to sell their land to Judge Blackwood, misfortune would soon follow. A barn would burn, a well would go dry, an accusation of witchcraft would surface. But the entries about Sarah were the most chilling. November 1st, 1880. Sarah Thornton refuses Judge Blackwood's final offer for the ranch. November the 2nd, Sarah is seen arguing with Dr. Wilson. I overheard her say, I know what you did. I found the documents. November 3rd, Matthew leaves for Helena. Sarah tells me she has hidden evidence in a safe place, just in case. November 5th, the fire. She knew something, Sophia whispered. Something that could destroy them. Matthew's face had gone pale under his scars. The land. It was always about the land. Not just the land, Sophia said, pointing to another entry. August 15th, 1880. Blackwood, Sheriff Hayes, and Dr. Wilson seen meeting late at night by Serpent Creek. They were looking at maps, talking about redirecting water. The dam, Matthew breathed. They've been creating the drought. To drive people out, Sophia said, to buy their land for pennies on the dollar. But why? She flipped through the pages until she found it, an entry from 2 years earlier. Overheard Dr. Wilson telling Judge Blackwood that the new railroad survey confirms rich silver deposits under the northern properties. The Thornton Ranch sits on the largest vein. Matthew shot to his feet as if he'd been electrocuted. He paced the small room like a caged animal. Silver, he snarled. She died for silver. If she died at all, Sophia said. He stopped, turning to face her, his eyes wild with a sudden, terrifying hope. What are you talking about? She turned to the very last page in the notebook. There was only one entry, written just a few months ago. April 10th, 1885. Overheard BB telling RB that ST is alive, being held at the old Morrison mine. ST Sarah Thornton, RB Rachel Blackwood. BB Benjamin Blackwood, Matthew whispered, the judge's son. The hope in his face was so bright it was painful to look at. Then it vanished, crushed by years of grief. It can't be. It's been 5 years. If she were alive, we have to find Rachel Blackwood, Sophia said, her voice firm. Before he could answer, they heard it. The sound of horses, a lot of them, coming fast. Matthew went to the window. His whole body went rigid. Riders, he said, his voice grim. At least a dozen of them, and they're armed. Sophia looked over his shoulder. It was a posse, and leading them, his silver hair gleaming in the sun, was Judge Blackwood. Matthew moved to a cabinet, pulling out a rifle and a shotgun. He tossed the shotgun to Sophia. They're not here to talk. We can't fight the whole town, she said. No, he agreed, but we can make damn sure they don't take us alive. He stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely in his hands. Sophia stood just inside the doorway. The riders fanned out, forming a semicircle in front of the house. Matthew Thornton, Blackwood yelled. We've come for the witch you're harboring. There's no witch here, Judge, Matthew yelled back. Only a woman you tried to assault. A murmur went through the riders. Blackwood's face flushed with anger. She's a liar, and you're a fool for protecting her. The only fool here is the man who thinks he can steal a whole valley and get away with it, Matthew retorted. What is he talking about? One of the riders asked. Sophia stepped out onto the porch. He's talking about the dams. Sarge, she shouted. He's talking about the silver. Judge Blackwood has been strangling this town, creating the drought so he can steal your land. The riders looked at each other, confused. They looked at the judge, whose face was now a mask of pure fury. Lie, he screamed. Witches' lies. Hayes, arrest them. The sheriff hesitated. On what charge, Judge? Does it matter? Blackwood shrieked. Are they lies, Father? A new voice. Everyone turned. It was Rachel Blackwood, riding up on her small bay mare. She positioned her horse directly between the posse and the porch. Rachel, go home, her father commanded. No, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I won't let you do this. She turned to the riders. My father doesn't care about witches. He cares about silver. He has the survey maps in his study. He and Dr. Wilson have been systematically damming the creeks for years. She's delusional, Blackwood sputtered. Am I? Rachel's voice dropped, becoming chillingly quiet. Then why, Father, do you keep a woman prisoner in the old Morrison mine? A dead silence fell over the yard. Matthew's face had gone completely white. Sarah, he breathed. Blackwood's composure finally shattered. He pulled a pistol from his coat, and he aimed it at his own daughter. Rachel, I will not warn you again. Sheriff Hayes spurred his horse forward, blocking Blackwood's shot. Put the gun down, Wesley. You're siding with them? Blackwood screeched in disbelief. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Blackwood fired. The shot went wild, but it was like a lightning strike. The posse erupted into chaos. Matthew grabbed Sophia, pulling her back inside as bullets started to fly, splintering the wood of the doorframe. This way, he yelled, pulling her toward the kitchen. He yanked a rug aside, revealing a hidden trapdoor. Go! She scrambled down the ladder into the cool, dark cellar. Matthew followed, pulling the door shut behind them. He lit a lantern. The small space was stocked with supplies. Sarah insisted, he said, his voice tight with emotion. She always said you never know when you'll need an escape route. He pushed against the dirt wall, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel. It leads to the creek bed. We can get out this way. Where are we going? Sophia asked, though she already knew. His scarred face was illuminated by the lantern light, transformed by a singular, burning purpose. To the Morrison mine, he said. I'm going to get my wife. Just then, a final shot rang out from above. Then silence. Heavy boots creaked on the kitchen floor. Matthew raised his rifle, aiming at the trap door. A voice called down, "Thornton, it's Sheriff Hayes. Blackwood's gone." "Gone where?" Matthew yelled, his rifle unwavering. "He's heading for the mine," Hayes called back. "I think he's going to silence his only witness." Matthew and Sophia looked at each other. They were out of time. They emerged into the kitchen to find Hayes standing alone, his face a landscape of regret. "Rachel told me everything," he said. "I should have stood up to him years ago." "Where is she now?" Sophia asked. "She went after him," Hayes said. "She knows the mine. She's been she's been sneaking food to Sarah for the past year." The words hit Matthew like a punch to the gut. His wife, alive, betrayed by everyone, but kept alive by the daughter of the man who had imprisoned her. Outside, the men who had come to arrest him were now waiting for his orders. A fire burned in Matthew's eyes, but it wasn't the fire of grief anymore. It was the fire of a hope that had been rekindled after 5 long, dark years. The old Morrison mine was a skeleton against the bruised twilight sky. Matthew, Sophia, and Sheriff Hayes crept toward the foreman's office, a dilapidated shack near the main entrance. A single lantern glowed inside. "Rachel's horse is here," Hayes whispered. "And Blackwood's." They could hear voices from inside. A man's, full of rage. A woman's, pleading. Matthew put his ear to the door. His face went grim. "He's threatening to kill Sarah if Rachel doesn't help him escape." Before they could make a plan, a gunshot exploded from within the shack. Matthew didn't hesitate. He kicked the door in and stormed inside. Judge Blackwood stood over an open trapdoor in the floor, a smoking pistol in his hand. Rachel was crouched on the other side of the room, a small revolver trembling in her own hands. She had shot her father in the shoulder. "Matthew!" she cried out in relief. Blackwood whirled around, his face a mask of pain and hatred. "Thornton, I should have known." "Where is she?" Matthew demanded, his rifle aimed squarely at Blackwood's heart. "Go to hell. After you." Matthew's finger tightened on the trigger. "Wait!" Sophia stepped forward. "We need him alive. We don't know where she is down there." Blackwood laughed, a ragged, ugly sound. Then he lunged, grabbing Rachel and pulling her in front of him as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. "Back off," he screamed, "or the girl dies." They were at a standoff. Matthew and Hayes had their guns on him, but they couldn't risk a shot. Sophia dropped to her knees beside the open trapdoor. "Sarah!" she yelled down into the darkness. "Sarah, it's Sophia, your sister." The move was a gamble meant to distract him for just a second. It worked. Blackwood glanced down at the trapdoor, confused. In that instant, Rachel drove her elbow back into his fresh shoulder wound. He roared in agony, his grip slackening. Matthew charged, tackling him to the ground. Hayes rushed in to help, slapping handcuffs on the struggling judge. And then a faint voice drifted up from the darkness below. "Hello? Is someone there?" Matthew froze. "Sarah," he breathed. He was down the ladder in a heartbeat. Sophia grabbed a lantern and followed him. The tunnel was cold and damp. It opened into a small, rock-hewn chamber. And there she was. She was chained to the wall. Her body was frail, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were a blaze of defiance, the same eyes as Sophia's. "Matthew?" she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. "Is it really you?" He fell to his knees beside her, his scarred face crumbling with 5 years of pent-up anguish and love. "Sarah," he choked out. "My God, I thought you were dead." She reached out a chained hand and touched the scarred side of his face. "What happened to you?" "The fire," he whispered. "I tried to save you." Hayes returned, dragging a cuffed and defeated Judge Blackwood with him. "The key to the chains," Hayes demanded. "I don't have it," Blackwood sneered. "Dr. Wilson does. He's the one who brings her food." The town doctor, another conspirator. The web of lies was bigger than any of them had realized. "Stand back," Matthew said. He raised his rifle, took careful aim, and fired. The shot deafened them in the small chamber. The chain link shattered. Sarah was free. Matthew gently lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. As he carried her toward the ladder, Sophia turned to Blackwood. "You kept my sister in a cage for 5 years," he sneered. "You Thornton women." Too stubborn for your own good. It's Harlow, actually, Sophia said, her voice dangerously calm. My father was a detective. He taught me how to hunt monsters like you. She touched the scar on her neck. You're not the first corrupt judge I've brought to justice, Blackwood, and you won't be the last. Outside, under the stars, Matthew laid Sarah gently on a blanket. Rachel knelt beside her, giving her water. Soon, another group of riders arrived from town. They brought Eleanor, and they brought the terrified Dr. Wilson, who quickly produced the key to Sarah's manacles. Mother and daughter were reunited in a flurry of tears. Why, Howard? Sarah asked the doctor, her voice barely a whisper. You were our friend. The silver, Wilson confessed, his voice wretched. He promised me a share. It always came down to greed. Blackwood was let out of the mine, his reign of terror finally over. It's over, Father, Rachel said, rising to face him. Something in him snapped. With a wild roar, he broke free from his captors and lunged at Rachel. If I go down, you're coming with me. Matthew was too far away. Hayes couldn't get a clear shot. It was Sophia who moved first. She threw herself between Rachel and Blackwood, taking the full force of his attack. They crashed to the ground, rolling toward the gaping, dark maw of the main mine shaft. His hands were on her throat, squeezing, the rage giving him a terrifying strength. You ruined everything, he hissed. Her vision started to go dark. The rotting planks of the mineshaft cover groaned under their weight. Then a single shot cracked through the night. Blackwood jerked. A dark stain spread across his chest. His grip loosened. He looked past her, his eyes wide with shock. Rachel stood 20 feet away, the sheriff's revolver held steady in her hands. Not my family, she said, her voice as cold and clear as a tombstone. Not again. Blackwood staggered backward. His foot went through a rotten plank. He teetered on the edge for a heart-stopping second. Then, with a final splintering crack, the ground gave way, and Judge Wesley Blackwood plunged into the darkness he had created, swallowed by the earth. For a moment, there was only silence, then a distant rumble of thunder. Everyone looked up. Clouds, dark, heavy, pregnant clouds were rolling in across the plains. A single, fat drop of rain hit Sophia's cheek, then another, and another. The drought was breaking. As the rain began to fall, washing the dust and the blood from the land, Matthew lifted Sarah onto his horse. She leaned back against him, turning her face up to the cleansing rain, the first she had felt in 5 long years. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the raindrops. Take me home, Matthew, she whispered. I'm taking you home, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This time, for good. The rain fell harder, a roar of applause from the heavens for a justice that had been delayed for far too long. Dawn broke over a new ridge arrest. The rain had washed the town clean, leaving the air smelling of wet earth and new beginnings. In the sheriff's office, the final pieces of the story were being put on record. Dr. Wilson, broken and weeping in his cell, had confessed to everything. The silver, the man-made drought, his role in Sarah's 5-year imprisonment. My name is Sophia Harlow, she told Sheriff Hayes, her voice hoarse from Blackwood's final attack. I came here to find out what happened to my sister. You did more than that, Hayes said, his pen scratching across the page. You gave this town its soul back. Rachel Blackwood came in, her face pale but resolute. They can't find my father's body, she said. The mineshaft collapsed. A fitting end, buried in the darkness he had worshipped. Matthew arrived soon after, his face lighter than Sophia had ever seen it. Sarah's sleeping, he said. The doctor from Helena is with her. She's weak, but she's going to make it. He placed a tarnished silver box on the sheriff's desk. And we found this, buried under the old oak tree, right where she said it would be. Inside was all the proof they needed. The survey maps, the forged documents, the letters. Blackwood's entire conspiracy laid bare. The silver under your ranch will make you a wealthy man, Matthew, Hayes said. Matthew just shook his head. I have Sarah back. I'm already the richest man in the world. They walked out into a town that was slowly coming back to life. People were emerging from their homes, not with suspicion, but with a dawning sense of hope. At the ranch, the community came together. Led by Eleanor and Rachel, the people of Ridgerist, the same people who had formed a lynch mob just days before. now came with hammers and lumber and food. They came to rebuild the Thornton house. They came to atone. Sarah watched from a chair on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her thin shoulders, as the frame of her new home rose from the ashes of the old one. That night they held a feast. Someone played a fiddle, and Matthew helped Sarah to her feet for a slow, gentle dance under the lantern light. Sophia watched them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was it. This was the justice she had been seeking. Not just punishment for the wicked, but healing for the broken. Eleanor sat beside her. "You won't stay, will you?" she asked. Sophia shook her head. "There are other towns, other Blackwoods." "A worthy calling," Eleanor said. "But remember to live too, child. Justice is a cold comfort on a winter night." 3 months later, the house was finished. Sarah was stronger, her laughter once again filling the rooms. Matthew's ghost had finally been laid to rest, and Ridge Arrest was on the slow, hard road to recovery. It was time for Sophia to leave. "You'll come back?" Sarah asked, her eyes pleading. "I'll always come back," Sophia promised, hugging her sister tight. "This is home now." Matthew gave her a small silver derringer. "For the road," he said. She rode out as the sun was rising, turning her horse toward the next town, the next fight. But this time, she wasn't riding away from something. She was riding toward it, and she knew she had a home and a family to return to. 1 year later, she did. She returned to a thriving ranch, a healthy sister, and a town that had found its heart. But she didn't come alone. A man named Benjamin Blackwood, the judge's estranged nephew, had found her. He was a lawyer, a good man trying to atone for the sins of his family name. He told her of another town, another group of families terrorized by a corrupt mining company. He wasn't asking her to fight. He was asking her to build. He wanted to create a new settlement, a sanctuary for the displaced families, a place built on fairness and truth, and he wanted her to help him. That night, Sophia sat under the old oak tree, her journal in her lap. For years it had been a record of darkness. But as she looked out at the peaceful, healing land, she began to sketch something new. A plan for a house, a layout for a school, a new beginning. Her sister Sarah came and sat with her. "What will you call this new place?" Sophia smiled. "Veritas," she said, the Latin word for truth. Her quest wasn't over, but it had changed. She was no longer just a hunter of monsters. She was a builder of hope. She knew there would always be shadows to fight, but now she also knew how to build the light. If you were inspired by Sophia's journey for justice and healing, then do me a favor and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe because there are always more strange, dark, and mysterious stories to tell.